And we are live. What's good, everybody? Yes, for the thumbnail, we got to keep it 07s because communists should always be looking this good. You never know when the people might be watching, so give a salute in the comments, 07s in the comments, for those of you watching, and for those of you who will be tuning in later. You are watching the Barracks on YouTube, on Twitter, soon to be on Rumble, I'm sure. We are taking the internet by storm. We will be talking about Africa again tonight because, as we all know, Africa is on the move. Africa is on the rise. With me, as always, is my co-host. He is big. He is bad. He is barely clad. He is the Yankee Tanky. What's going on?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready, we are able, and we are going to bring it to the globalists, bring it to the imperialists, and bring forth a new America.
Yeah, we are secretly starting a cloning program of the late great Macho Man Randy Savage, of which the Yankee Tanky is testing the serum for. He is becoming more powerful every day, so make sure to smash like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, which you are probably watching from right now. Follow us on Twitter at the Barracks Live, handles in the comments there. Welcome. Come on in the room. Share this video everywhere because we got a lot to talk about. Yeah, Yankee here hosted a stream. But I was absent yesterday because working a late night shift. So yeah, for those of you who didn't give it a watch, the beginning of this conversation, we're dipping our toes in it yesterday. Yankee, you want to just give people a breakdown of some of the conversations you had yesterday while I pull up these clips?
Yeah, most definitely. So one of the big things we were talking about over down in Niger, we see what appears to be a coalition forming between Niger, Burkina Faso, as well as Mali. And on the other side, you see ECOWAS, which seems to be entirely backed by the West, the French, the American, the British imperialists. And it seems like Wagner from Russia might be going down over down there in Niger to help defend them from all of the Western chaos. So that's part of what we talked about. We also talked about organizing, things of that nature, what communists need to do in the 21st century to try to break this imperialist system.
Yeah, it was a good show. Make sure to go and rewatch it. Get a cup of herbal tea. Stay up late into the night. Educate yourselves. Because I have been of the opinion for almost a decade now that Africa is the stage on which world events begin. That it is the laboratory for not just for imperialist violence on the side of the imperial powers, Britain, France, the United States, but also for the tactics and strategies we'll see in the coming decades of how people around the world successfully push back against the imperialist powers. Africa has always been the laboratory. So certainly for the 20th century, the 21st century shall be no different. Before we get into it, though, some of you may have seen we have talked about Ron DeSantis and RFK on this show before, because now that we're a little more than a year away from the 2024 elections, the election cycle is going to be heating up. And more than a year out, the candidates are already shilling for Israel like it was their job, almost like it is their job. But here, Ron DeSantis gave a speech. I'm not going to show you the full speech. Just trust. He talked a lot about battling anti-Semitism. Much how RFK has been on tour recently with what's his name? Shmuley something. Shmuley
With a name like Shmuley,
Shmuley
how could you?
Boteach, yeah. Oh, I wonder what country he's from.
Hmm.
But yeah, just on tour with Shmuley Boteach, shilling for Israel. As Milkman, our third co-host who is not here today, has shared on his Twitter page, RFK has made the CEO of the Zionist Organization of America a part of his campaign. He's going to be like a major part of the United States-Israel relations. So just normal behind the scenes stuff that as we move towards World War III just becomes more unsavory than it's ever been. So yeah, so it's only a 5-second clip, so I feel like I do have to give context. But so Ron DeSantis in this speech was talking to an audience about battling anti-Semitism, as he has often done as he's done before in the state of Florida. Let me pull up the text, some of the text from the speech here, since I don't want to. Since a minute of Ron DeSantis is too much Ron DeSantis. But yeah, in his speech, saying in the speech from the clip that I've pulled here, yeah, maybe I can post the full video to Twitter or something. Let me know. He says he promises to combat anti-Semitism if elected president. Quote, during the conversation with the candidate segment that aired exclusively online, Republican presidential I'm quoting the Telegram channel that I got this from, by the way. Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis was asked by voter Laura Londerman Garber about what his response was to anti-Semitism. Is that I believe that's the correct clip, the correct quote. Anyway, saying that he vows to treat battling anti-Semitism, like we treat battling racism right now, which, for someone who is as anti-woke as Ron DeSantis, whatever anti-woke means, if treating, battling anti-Semitism is like battling racism, that makes him woke by definition, since battling racism is a woke practice. So you were saying something, Yankee?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Ron DeSantis is our woke warrior, our soldier for the woke agenda now, and you gotta love Ron DeSantis, just becoming the strongest woke warrior we have ever seen.
Yeah, neoconservatives are going woke now more than ever, since they're starting color revolutions and wars in places that aren't feminist enough, that aren't gay enough. The U.S. military is gayer than it's ever been, so it makes sense that Ron DeSantis is going woke to justify, as he says, we're going to be invading some third world countries over anti-Semitism.
That have become hotbeds of anti-Semitism. Yeah. We're going to go after these third world countries that have become hotbeds of anti-Semitism. We're going to go after these third world.
That's the potential president of the United States, the second place Republican candidate for president of the United States, talking about invading, quote, third world countries for being anti-Semitic. I wonder who he's talking about, Yankee.
Earlier you were talking about South Africa and how they seem to be very big critics of Israel. So that might be one of our first guests. We got to prevent, the Boer genocide, after all.
The same South Africa that's a member of BRICS, which is talking about starting its own currency to divest from the U.S. dollar.
It is the same South Africa.
It's probably not South Africa. He could have meant a lot of third world countries that we should invade and bomb and and have civilians be murdered in shock and awe campaigns because they're too anti-Semitic.
Yeah. We need to take down the anti-Semitic third world countries,
Third world countries like Lebanon are complaining too much about being bombed by Israel. So we're just going to have them be bombed by the United States.
It's not enough that we occupy a third of Syria. Let's just take over all Syria so we can, prevent all the anti-Semitism in Syria, right?
Right. The deep state lizard people are far more Phoenician and deserving. They're, who really deserves to live in Syria? The Syrians?
Doubt. No, clearly it should all be part of Greater Israel, right?
Yeah, exactly. Ron DeSantis has visited Greater Israel many times, and he's looking for a place to put a beach house. So I don't see any Syrians building enough beach houses.
I hear Syria has some great beach lines.
Yeah, that's so the fact that two presidential candidates so far just are already this early out from the race, just outdoing each other of who can not just give funding to Israel, not just give, vocal support, but who can outdo the Israelis in the most violence that they're committing in the Gulf region. I mean, we had talked about earlier in a different stream, RFK just going on an apologia tour about how advanced and really progressive the Israeli Defense Force is, and how the IDF should be lauded for their use of retail combat. A phrase I'm still losing sleep over.
You look at the whole situation with RFK Jr. Now you see Ron DeSantis. Let's be real for a second. Almost every single presidential candidate, other than I guess Dr. Cornel West, to be fair, which I have my problems with him, but hey, at least he doesn't support Israel, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, gosh.
Every dissident candidate is really just paid for to take votes away from whoever the front runner is. That's how the two-party system works in this country. I truly don't think that Cornel West is serious in his candidacy. The Green Party exists to siphon votes away from the Democrat Party. The Libertarian Party exists to siphon votes away from the Republican Party.
I think I agree in the context of parties. The only thing I would say, this would be the caveat, and then I'd speak more for the Libertarians than the Greens specifically. I think there are good people within some of these third parties, and these people do want change. It's just that the apparatus of these parties, these third parties themselves, you're right, that's the purpose that they serve.
And at this point, to have someone like Joe Biden, who openly sips from a dark Brandon mug after jailing his major political opponent, and says, and is really leaning into the meme, says he's not going to have debates for the Democrat Party. There's not going to be any debates for the Democrat primary. To run as against the Democrat Party is, you're actively sabotaging. You're not just being naive or idealistic or.
Yeah, I think that those that are on the top of the leadership, they know what they're doing, right? Yeah. The average voter, though, I think the average voter is picking third parties because they're tired of the two-party duopoly, right? But that's why us communists are like, yeah, that's why electoral politics is just bullshit in the first place, right?
That's really why we have to make our own communist party happen in the United States.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if you can see this. Since I can't find more since I can't find more clips of the text from that speech where he talks about invading third world countries. Here's Ron DeSantis is desperately trying to. One, he's not making concessions to Israel. He's much better at that than he is about being a folksy politician. Just this clearly staged photograph. He says, driving through Benton County, I noticed Peggy's signs, so we stopped by to thank her for her support. Holding this woman hostage for the most cardboard cutout wooden. I'm pretty sure these are.
Can you get closer to their faces?
Maybe. Hang on, I think I can. Computer enhance.
I don't know, man. I don't know what is worse. Ron DeSantis' cheesy, schmarmy smile, or that lady in the middle that's just like, please let me go.
The fluoride stare. Florida has a lot of fluoride in the water, which is where the name comes from. If you didn't know, it's because of how much fluoride is in the water. I'm very curious as what this shirt means. I bleed blue and white. Given Ron DeSantis' speech about kowtowing to Israel to combat anti-Semitism, I want to say it has something to do with the Israeli flag, but that's just a hunch. Anyway, he is much the presidential candidates, all except Donald Trump, much better at talking to members of the military-industrial complex than they are at talking to regular people who don't want war in any country. Because we're America first. Which is the segue to the topic you've all been waiting for. I know the thumbnail that Yankee Tanky has made has really been the hot and button issue of the last few days, especially on Twitter. The Wagner PMC, according to some multiple sources, has officially touched down in Niger. They have agreed to work in a defensive capacity with the country after the week-old coup has been pushing all of NATO's buttons. So we here are quite excited to see such support from Russia, the leader of the free world by far.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at what's going on with Wagner in Niger, and then just generally speaking, just how much support Russia and Africa, there's been so much of them, coming closer and closer together, all on the backs of the BRICS and what China has, lifted this multipolar world out of, this unipolar control of the Western powers, You love to see it. You love to see what's going on in Africa. You love to see specifically what's going on in Niger. You see the African people in Niger saying, no, enough is enough. We don't want your IMF loans. We don't want your debt trap. We want to actually lift our people out of poverty, and we are willing to fight to defend that.
Yeah, and this is really the latest of many such deployments of the Wagner PMC in Africa. Earlier, they had been working in Libya, in Mali, in Chad, in the Central African Republic, places where there had been similar collapses of state power or transfers of state power, just general upheaval in the political structure that they had been called in to act as training personnel, as security forces for high-profile buildings or assets such as mines in the Central African Republic. Wagner has so many forces in so many countries that That's their, outside of Ukraine, that's their main security function, is as an auxiliary force for the main military body of whatever country they're in, as a training group, but also to protect while the military of whatever country they're in is out fighting a civil war or doing repressing insurgents like in Libya. They'll act as trained and highly effective security for assets that the military can't keep its eye on, but the country desperately needs. So this is one more instance of this, just to clarify, because some people might think millions of Wagner troops parachuting out of the sky and landing in the Niger deserts to storm the. No, it's I think it's about 1,000 people. No, sorry, I'm thinking of a different country that they had 1,000 troops in, but it's usually only a couple hundred people. It's probably going to be the same now.
What's crazy is that whenever you talk about Wagner and what's going on in Africa, you'll see a bunch of these liberals and shit libs and leftists and such and so forth, and even some conservatives say, oh, Wagner just has this fetish for trying to colonize Africa. It's all this projection, right? Because it's always, I think it was Anna Kasparian in particular said that was what Wagner was. It was just this, like neo-colonial force that wants to occupy African countries and act as, apartheid keepers or whatever, but that's the projection. That's the projection you see from, Western political entities, whether it's those in power or it's the people that love to drink the propaganda coming from the Western propaganda machine.
Right. Yeah. The same Wagner forces that defended Syria from an ISIS takeover, that Wagner PMC is a colonialist force, or that was present in, like I said, all those African countries that were being threatened with collapse, because that's what the imperialist powers are designed to do. That is what their ultimate strategy is. For them, when the opponent goes on the defensive from utter destruction, whoever comes to their aid is colonizing the helpless Africans. But when you look at what happens when America goes into countries like Libya or Somalia, and the third and fourth wave effects that come out of those state failures, like Libya just stopped being a country and was taken over by Arab slavers. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama brought slavery back to the African continent. So anyone coming to the aid of these countries is clearly a colonial force of the highest order. Is not even just dumb. That's cynical on the part of people in the media and politicians who say that, because they are somewhat correct in that people just don't look this up for themselves. They are spoon-fed this information. But you got to help us change all that, y'all. You got to get the word out there.
We got to fight this information war, and it starts with you.
That's right. MJ Anti-Imperialist Party says in the comments, Africa is becoming another anti-imperialist force. What you talking about, MJ? Africa been the premier anti-imperialist force. What you know about Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde taking on NATO all at the same time? Tiny little African country beating back the united forces of imperialism in Europe and America. What you know about?
Well, the one thing I'll point out in the context of Africa right now is that, yes, you definitely have seen historically small African countries standing up for their own sovereignty, but there's a certain thing that is changing, and that is Africa is starting to form its own pole.
Block formations, yeah.
And that's a major thing, right? That's the thing I've been rooting for in the context of Latin America for a long time, that it's not enough to have these nationalist struggles. That's great that you guys are struggling for your own sovereignty against the Western imperialists, but when you take the necessary steps to build your own pole of influence in your region, you can operate like Russia, you can operate like China does, and that changes the whole ball game.
Yeah, it's the clear difference between block formations in Africa versus whatever Lula's doing in South America, which I'm not going to. I have to resist the urge to condemn him entirely. I know he is very likely a CIA asset, but I gotta give him the benefit of the doubt until all hell breaks loose.
Well, thankfully, Bukele exists, so
right.
There's always hope in Latin America. Don't give up on it entirely.
Central America has more block discipline than South America, which is, funny considering how tiny like all of the Central American countries are, and how small their military forces are, how small their economic output, and yet they have more capacity to have a conversation like this and to actually support Nayib Bukele than Lula da Silva, who is president of the second largest country in the hemisphere, the sixth largest country on the planet in terms of population size. So you're right that the new development in the African continent is not just these individual nations fighting for their sovereignty, but they are forming anti-imperialist blocs now. This has been tried in the 60s with countries like Ghana, where Kwame Nkrumah had tried to form many such coalitions and organized a lot of international summits around anti-imperialism, but never successfully building the United States of Africa that Muammar Gaddafi wanted to see in his lifetime. Peace be upon him. Yeah. But it's finally happening. That vision that Gaddafi had, that Hillary Clinton murdered him for, is coming to fruition. That kind of development of the most powerful continent on the planet is, it was only a matter of time.
I mean, with so many great peoples, with so many natural resources, it's only a matter of time until Africa completely breaks from the imperialist chains that have been put on them for the last few hundred years. Africa is rising, and the Wignats can cope about that fact, but it's happening. You either have to come to terms, or just cope and cry in a corner in your room, because you Wignats, what else are you gonna do? You either come to terms or you cry. You're trying to get the United States, you're trying to get Germany and France to try and freaking invade South Africa and invade Niger. What the hell is wrong with you people? I thought you guys, were fine with, as long as we were a white country, we don't care if people, down in Africa or down in Latin America, rise up for themselves. But all of a sudden they start doing that, and now you feel this urge that you have to go down and oppress these people.
Yeah.
What the hell is wrong with you people?
I posted about it. Yeah, I posted about that exact thing on Twitter, that the America First facade of these Wignats drops immediately as soon as they're called to have this foreign allegiance to a super minority in South Africa, or a belligerent group in Australia that wants to eliminate the Aborigines from the Australian outback. And Australia, a country, its own continent, its own whole continent, which has never produced anything of value as a country in its entire existence, feels that it has any room to have solidarity with white
to
people
be
in America.
Fair, though, there is one thing Australia that I know for a fact has produced that was good, and that's the union organizer David Fox.
Since Niger uh, produces 1/3 of France's uranium. Australia has a lot of uranium in it. They can probably justify their existence by collaborating with France, since Europe is becoming more of a shithole every day.
If there was supposed to be white internationalism, as Haas has been calling it, that's the only type of white internationalism I would support. Australia is supporting the French economy by providing them uranium.
Right, these mediocre white countries. America is the only country, that's the only white country that is not mediocre. All of these other ones, Europe is populated by monkeys. Australia is, like, when they went to film Mad Max in Australia, that was a documentary and not a fictional film.
I love it.
And the Boers in South Africa are about the same in population size as however many people are in Disney World at this moment, as compared to California. So, yeah, don't even say that, oh, you're America first if you're a white nationalist, a Wigger nationalist on Twitter, on YouTube, anywhere you are, saying that, oh, I love America. No, you just love anyone who looks exactly like you, a decrepit, sunken, unshaven ape.
Well, that's exactly why they cope about the demographic change over the last 30, 40 years in the United States, right? Like, no one here is denying that, the Hispanic population in the U.S. has increased. But let's be real. Why is that even a problem?
I mean, it's not our fault. It's not my Hispanic community's fault that nobody wants to fuck white people, that y'all aren't breeding. And your numbers are going down. Nobody wants to fuck you. I'm sorry. Get your shit together. Use a skincare routine. Bathe. And then we'll
hide
see
your ugly chin with a beard. It's not that hard, gentlemen.
Right.
I've been doing this for like 5 years. You can do it too.
It's so it's so easy to not be mediocre. But when you hail the proud history of the Hyperborean race, the international Hyperborean race, and how they were the real builders of the pyramids in Egypt, it's easy to wallow in your mediocrity. Whereas Africa is making real moves for independence, real moves to be like this unbeatable military bloc for the 21st century. Like when that happens, it's over. It is over. People don't understand. Europe has whatever you want to say about gay Europe. Like a continent with no natural resources, no strategic value in terms of like all of it's either in the swamp like Belgium and Germany, or it's up in the frigid north like Sweden.
I'll have you know, we have a real country in France. It's a real country. It is a great country, even though it's totally on fire right now. Ignore that. Ignore the fact that we are losing our uranium. France is a great country. Very good.
Europe is Russia's backyard. Stalin should have steamrolled over Germany and gone up to France. The Arabs can have Spain. Reconquer Al-Andalus. Make the Andalusian Peninsula Arabian again. We should have steamrolled over France and just made all of Europe Russia, because that's the only way Europe is going to have any value. And this is not the case for Africa. Africa, which is the most resource-rich continent on the planet. Africa, which has yet to have a serious population boom like all of the other people joking like, oh, Africans have too many kids. I was like, Africa is the second largest continent on the planet and one of the least populated because of the history of depopulation and imperialism just destroying people's ability to like organize to live. So once they start industrializing, there's no turning back. Africa will be just an unbeatable force for the rest of time. All of Africa experiencing its own baby boom, having control. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Okay. No. I was just going to say that.
Uh-oh. We have lost the Yankee Tanky. As soon as you start getting heated, for the liberation of Africa, that's when YouTube starts throttling.
Okay. Keep the show going while I'm figuring.
Right. Yeah, turn your video off. We'll see if that helps your Wi-Fi. Because we all know that the deep state wants to throttle. As soon as you start getting into it, that's when the deep state wants to throttle. So make sure, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to Yankee Tanky's YouTube channel. I haven't been playing our banner. We have this wonderful ticker on the bottom of the video that I haven't been playing. Yeah, FBI coming after the Yankee Tanky. Very real. All of us who do this kind of work in a very non-mimetic way have to deal with these kinds of consequences. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to follow the Barracks on Twitter at the Barracks Live. You can follow the Yankee Tanky on his YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed at the Yankee Tanky. Is it 7133? Yeah, there in the ticker at the Yankee Tanky 7133. You can follow me over at Hard Targets at Hard Targets Intel. What's good, Yankee
I believe
Tanky?
I'm back.
You look 1,000% back. So I was just telling people to go and subscribe over to your YouTube channel to beat back the throttling that the deep state has been enacting on our fire new platform.
Well, I can tell you one thing. The more that you go and follow me, the more likely we are to defeat the global imperialists trying to throttle the Barracks. So head over to my channel. Make sure you've subscribed. Make sure you go over to our Twitter on the Barracks Live, and follow us on there. One way or another, we will make sure the Barracks is victorious.
Yeah. Reach out to us if you know anyone who's trying to start up a stream, but they don't know how, or they're too scared, or they're too soft muscularly, and they need firm discipline to get that six-pack abs that they need to build an audience. Get them in touch with us. Hit us up in the DMs, and we'll make sure to make it happen. But yeah, just so you had, just to go back onto Niger for a second, you had shared with me the news that gives this a much more tense twist about the Wagner PMC being in, and this is something that's really worth talking about, is Niger has given, let me pull up the article here. Niger has given France an ultimatum that it must withdraw its troops within 30 days. They have signed, the documents are signed. I posted it on the Barracks. I can pull that up as well. But the military deals that were signed back in like 1977 have been revoked. And Niger has given France the demand to withdraw its 1,500 or so troops from the country within 30 days. Earlier today, I'm not sure how many of you have seen this, France has denied that it will be withdrawing troops from Niger. The United States also has a couple hundred troops in Niger, doing the same things for the overthrown puppet government, what Wagner is doing for the revolutionary coup government. So both the United States and France have said that they are not going to be withdrawing troops, meaning we have a new hybrid war on our hands. We have a new Ukraine on our hands on the African continent. And you were saying, Yankee Tanky, that this is going to have some serious consequences, possibly even, maybe this is the Ukraine was just the preview to World War III, which will be happening on the African continent. But tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, the way I see things, if we are going to continue to escalate, not just in Ukraine, but we're starting these tensions, the French and the United States pushing up against these African countries who are calling out for Wagner, right? And the thing is, the U.S. and most of the Western governments does not believe that Wagner is really, this independent military. They think that it's not a private contractor, that it's simply, an extension of the Russian military. And in some extent, after what ended up transpiring with the, fake coup, real coup, whatever, that didn't finish in Russia that Wagner was attempting, right? There was the consolidation of 4 sections of Wagner that are now part of the Russian military. So there is a little bit of truth to that statement that, Wagner effectively is an extension of the Russian military. So it kind of brings, up to question whether it's basically U.S. and French forces that might get in a direct conflict with Wagner forces, which are by proxy basically an extension of the Russian military, right? So I have a lot of concerns about this. When you have this proxy war going on of Ukraine, you already have all this attention, or all this tension between, the West and Russia. I mean, this is just adding more kindling to the fire. Who knows if, the U.S. will, say Wagner ends up attacking, say, some Nigerian forces, and there were some U.S. and French forces that were, amongst these Nigerian forces, right? Well, I mean, that could put us into an escalation to a third world war. And that's my big concern, is that, the United States is going to take Wagner as it is a Russian force. It would say that Russia attacked our forces in Niger that were amongst, say, Nigerian forces or whatever. And then next thing you know, this snowballs into a third world war.
Yeah, the fact is that scenario is already playing out right now in Ukraine. We have U.S. troops in Ukraine. As much as the government does not want to admit it, there are troops, many kinds of troops, giving intelligence on the ground, doing trainings in Ukraine, not just in other countries, like, going to Poland to train Ukrainian fighter pilots to die in 3 days after being on the battlefield with their busted old planes. But actual troops in Ukraine, inside Ukraine, doing what they call audits. And who knows how many are there. The U.S. military had offered hazard pay to... Did you see this?
How do you offer hazard pay?
Yeah, hazard pay to people who got injured in Ukraine.
I thought we didn't have U.S. soldiers. How are we offering hazard pay to U.S. soldiers that are not in Ukraine?
They mean they mean psychological harm. They mean if
Oh yeah.
you're scrolling through the news and you're suicidal because the West has fallen.
It reminds me of, I mean, this is obviously satirical what you're saying here, but it reminds me of in the Pentagon, there were people that were complaining about something that Cuba was supposedly doing with like sound waves or something.
Yeah. Yeah, Havana syndrome.
That's right, that Havana syndrome, that's right.
It would have done my Cuban people proud if I had named this show Havana syndrome. But we gotta keep it global, you know. I can't just be focused on my little part of the world. So MJ Anti-Imperialist Party asks, will NATO, US do multiple global fronts? Ukraine, Africa, Taiwan. I mean, US and NATO already have multiple fronts open. Like US AFRICOM has existed for over a decade at this point. And what's his name? Colonel McGregor has. I keep wanting to say like Conor McGregor, the fighter. Yeah, Colonel McGregor talked about it on Jackson Hinkle's show, The Dive, that he was an active duty member when AFRICOM was formed, but it hasn't been around for very long. But the U.S. has dozens of bases. I think it's over 50 bases, military bases, all over the African continent. Some of them whose location is top secret, so we really don't know how many.
And of course, that's not including all the military bases we have stretched all across the Pacific, that stretch all across surrounding China, that stretch all throughout Europe. I mean, we have military bases. We have more military bases in more countries right now than they have military bases in U.S. states.
Yeah, and it might not seem like they're involved in, shooting operations, but they're there, like I said, in the capacity that Wagner shows up in anti-imperialist struggles. The U.S. shows up in an imperialist context, does that same thing to train insurgents or to train soldiers of a puppet government to blow up strategic assets rather than defend strategic assets. They'll be able to blow up strategic assets like the U.S. Navy did for the Nord Stream pipeline. So they're already just stretched over the entire globe. So I guess more likely what you mean is, will it have multiple hybrid wars, like multiple Ukraines on every continent? And that's looking. I don't think they have a choice in the matter. I think this new African bloc that is competing against ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which is the pro-US, pro-neo-colonial bloc in West Africa. This anti-imperialist bloc that is forming poses such a threat to the U.S. dominance on the African continent that they would have no choice but to start another hybrid war to preserve the neo-colonial relationship of debt slavery, of deindustrialization, of insurgency, of implanting and installing puppet regimes like they have in Nigeria, well, every African continent, but in West Africa specifically, the big countries being Mali, Nigeria, Niger, which I just learned today is the biggest recipient in that region of Africa, is the biggest recipient of U.S. aid.
And oddly enough, Niger is also the poorest country in Africa.
Yeah.
Odd connection, isn't it?
Right. Where this is something that it's always worth mentioning that Haas from Infrared has pointed out, that the goal of imperialism for the past 100 years, since the U.S. took control of global supremacy. It became the world police. The goal of imperialism is no longer extraction. It's no longer to build extractivist forces and plunder these countries in Africa, in Asia, in South America. It's to salt the earth of what's there. It's to maintain control over their monopolies by permanently disabling these countries under invasion and under neocolonial coercion.
Well, that's one of the reasons why.
So keeping Niger one of the poorest countries on earth and keeping it under the yoke of debt is linked. Those things are connected. They're not coincidental. It's not an accident of history. It is by design. You keep these people poor, you make sure that they can never industrialize, and the vast treasures that exist under their feet, the minerals, the oil, the lumber, the cattle, the agriculture, all of that stuff cannot be developed to turn Africa into the superpower it is destined to become.
Which is why you see what they have done in Ukraine, right? You see the uranium, low-grade uranium rounds that is being sent to Ukraine. Why do you think that they are using those? Because every shell that ends up hitting the ground, that ends up making the soil in one of the most, the largest agricultural breadbasket of Europe, effectively, completely unfertile. Right? Because they don't care about Ukrainians. They want them to die. Just as they want people in Niger to die. They want the people in Nigeria to die. They want the people in South Africa to die. They want the people in Congo to die. They want every African peoples to die. It's all about degrowth. It's all about depopulation. And that's why fundamentally, whether you have agreements or disagreements with the Schiller's Institute or, whatever other given organization, because there's many people that are coming to this conclusion, right? It is all about degrowth. It's all about depopulation. It is a Malthusian agenda to decrease the world's population. And now we're starting to see it come home.
The cluster bombs that just got approved by Joe Biden to be dropped in Ukraine is, that every country on earth besides, the United States and Russia consider crimes against humanity to use cluster bombs. Only Russia has never used cluster bombs, and certainly not in Ukraine. The U.S. is just giving them to Ukraine. It's the same tactic used in African countries. In the 60s, cluster bombs made in Sweden, sold to the British, and then shipped to countries in Africa that were fighting against NATO. Places, like I mentioned, like Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, just cluster bombed. And those little bomblets just going unexploded for decades, and just making the place that you're living just living hell for the next few decades. I mean, Vietnam, obviously, but so this ultimatum that we have pulled up here on the screen is, in that context, you can see why the France and U.S. respective governments are adamant about not pulling out their troops, because the minute that happens, development would happen so quickly that U.S., France, Britain, these regimes of imperialist powers would not last a month. As soon as the Sahel region, like the sub-Saharan region, starts to develop, and you have to compete with these people who are desperately hungry for industrialization. That's it for you. You can't finance the dollar. You can't export debt to these other countries to keep the dollar afloat. You're willing to
The
start a
U.S.
hybrid war for that
is
reason.
the U.S.'s worst nightmare would be a country like Niger deciding they're going to do something similar to what Gaddafi did in Libya and build a massive irrigation system, right? You look at Niger on the map, right? You can see it's largely desert. What if there was de-desertification happening like China has been doing to, I think it's the Gobi Desert out in China? Or as in, like I said, like Gaddafi, the irrigation system he installed in Libya when he was still in power, right? That would lift Niger, out of so much poverty because, Niger at this current moment is still very reliant on grain shipments from other countries, right? Well, as soon as they're self-sufficient on food, I mean, there you go. There's going to be a population boom. They're going to have the means in which to really industrialize Niger. So that's the West's worst nightmare. So you keep U.S. soldiers there, you keep French soldiers there, you make sure that Wagner has no ability to be able to supply lines, because that's going to be one of Wagner's biggest issues, frankly, in Niger. Niger is inland, right? There's no easy access to for Wagner in Niger to keep supplying things like arms and things of that nature, right? So that's going to be one of the big obstacles that the Wagner, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso alliance is going to have when they're in the condition of actually repelling Nigeria and the other Western-backed ECOWAS countries.
Yeah, the population question is, when you look at a map of just how underpopulated Niger is compared to Nigeria, which is, like as you mentioned, Nigeria, which is the most populated country in Africa. I think it's also the biggest economy. The two just being side by side. It's crazy just how many similarities this brewing conflict plays. How many similarities this conflict has to Libya. Another very big economy before Gaddafi was murdered, surrounded by desert and sparsely populated regions. And as soon as Libya collapsed, and the state collapsed, and all of the military fighters that had come to be paid, like a lot of Tuareg mercenaries being paid to defend Gaddafi's forces, and a lot of other groups that were being held back by Libyan military forces just becoming terrorists and insurgents fleeing into the desert. I think that's what Britain, France, and the United States want in Niger. Niger just being, because that's what happened in Mali, which is right there. It's right next door to Niger. It's right next. They're all part of that ECOWAS formation. When Libya collapsed, all of these insurgents that formed from all of the guns that just like were dispersed into the general population got into the hands of these terrorist groups who all fled into the desert and stayed there for years and years, and just and had to be, now that became a new problem for all these countries that kept them from really developing because all of their
If my knowledge of history is correct, and this is relatively recent history, Boko Haram, that terrorist organization that was aligned with ISIS, odd connection considering how ISIS was created, right? They went into the northern region of Nigeria and Niger as a way to keep themselves secure as they land terrorist attacks down in the Christian majority southern part of Nigeria, right? So we already seen that, to be given like a specific historic example of what you're talking about, what the U.S. government has done.
And so like just refusing to withdraw U.S. and French troops and just keeping them around to start a hybrid war to just help the collapse of Niger, to expedite the collapse of the country. Doesn't just it has these second and third wave effects that just last for decades and decades. We're still battling Al-Qaeda. Like, we're still, after all these years, battling ISIS after a decade when they formed after we pulled out of Iraq. That's where
because it was never a war on terror. It was a war to create terror.
And that's why I'm not. I know this is a weird thing to say. I mean, that's why I'm not worried about this turning into World War III. I had at the beginning of the stream when I said Africa is the laboratory for how World War III will happen between the global superpowers, not between smaller African countries. Those are the stages for hybrid warfare, where the superpowers like the United States, France, and now Russia, bringing in Wagner PMC, will test out their ability to supply forces, to train troops, to use new technology, to realign global allegiances for when the shooting war happens between those powers directly. Africa, that was what Africa was before World War I. After the scramble for Africa happened between the European powers, and there was no more land to colonize, and Germany decided to start a war. It can no longer expand in Africa, so it was just going to start expanding across Europe. And when that failed and the German economy collapsed and all of these other military forces were being kicked out of Africa, like the fascist tanks out of Algeria, out of Morocco, Italy being kicked out of Eritrea and Ethiopia, and also Germany, obviously losing its colonies because its government was taken over
right
after World War I.
Well,
those powers becoming the fascist powers in World War II were testing their military prowess in Africa. So just based on those historical trends that led to World War I and World War II, I think these hybrid wars will tell us who will be the major players if a world war breaks out, and the technologies to be most utilized, like air warfare in World War I and tank warfare in World War II. In World War III, it's going to be. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. World War III is going to be drone warfare, cyber warfare, and I think those are the two major things. Oh, and biological warfare.
Right. Well, one of the things that I often hear from people who still insist on the idea that the United States and the West has the technological advanced, they're more technologically advanced than, say, countries like Russia and China, right? We've already seen a lot of this play out in Ukraine. Where did you see the most successful Russian advances? It wasn't when they were using old styles of warfare, when they were trying to bring in the tanks like it was World War II. That's in fact one of the early on in the Russian-Ukraine conflict where Russia ended up receiving the most losses in that war. But when they started using a combination of small squad teams and drones as their mechanism to seize territory, right? And I think we're going to see something similar play out. And in the context of Africa, you're going to see how, frankly, Russia and China and Iranian, I expect Iranian drones to also be utilized within Africa. We're going to see how much more advanced, frankly, the Chinese and Russian and Iranian drones are compared to the U.S. drone system. We've relied on our drone warfare for a very long time in the context of the so-called war on terror. right? But that's going to get blown out of the water now because our drones operate on a completely different level. It's large drones that come in and launch, Tomahawk missiles or other types of missile weaponry, right? But you can't bring something like that in with air support. So that forces the United States to try to use some of their smaller drones. And effectively, Russia, Iran, and China just have better small drones than the United States does.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Iran, because when you see that Iran can help these smaller militaries keep up the battle for aerial supremacy. America has had aerial supremacy forever, like since the end of World War II, and that's critical in maintaining, like, that's how you shock and awe a country. That's how you collapse a government, is you send in planes to firebomb a city from the air. You firebomb their state capital from the air, and so that they have no place of operations to run their government. And you have this drone drone warfare and drone swarms now that can be created that can help combat a lot of that this drone warfare from the United States' side. It completely shifts equalizes the balance of power, like you said. So
yeah, I think that I think it's beyond equalizing, because then you also have to look at this part too. The U.S. doesn't have the industrial capacity to supply African forces with the amount of drones necessary to compete with Russian, Chinese, as well as Iranian drone forces too, right? So it's not just a conversation of China, Iran, and Russia having the more advanced technology when it comes to small drone warfare. It's also the fact that they have more ability to put out more of these drones, right? So, and that brings the next conversation, which is where I've seen the United States make some large leaps. We haven't seen really it being implemented. This might be the first war zone we see American droids used in warfare, which I think that's going to be
droids.
Yes, droids. Yeah, okay, so the United States has been using droids for reconnaissance missions, for example. We also have seen droids being used in particularly for civilian activities, right? The police in the New York City with the NYPD, when they had an apartment building that collapsed, they used a droid to go in and pretty much make sure that there was no one inside of the collapsed parking garage, right? Now that's civilian use, but the U.S. Government has been experimenting with putting weaponry on these droids, and I think it's only a matter of time until we start seeing droid warfare being implemented, and I don't think they have the industrial capacity to really put out these droids. But I do think it might be the beginning of, if the United States starts doing it, you might see a snowball where China, Russia, and other countries start investing more in this technology so they can outcompete the United States when it comes to droids as well.
That's interesting. Droid.
So it's very early stages.
I said cyber warfare was going to be a major capacity under which we fight World War III. Droid warfare is terrifying. Consider the rise of the AI computers taking over the droids, and just having robot dogs roaming the.
Well, one of the things you have to remember when it comes to the droid warfare and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to have a draft anymore. If you have the manufacturing capacity and the raw which why is the United States onshoring a lot of these computer chip manufacturing jobs I don't think it's to supply American consumers. I have a feeling it's more connected to the military industrial complex, what Joe Biden's trying to push, right? Well, we won't have to install a draft. We won't need U.S. soldiers. What's that? We can't get soldiers to join the U.S. military anymore? Oh, we'll just have droids do all of our warfare. We don't need the human population to be involved with our wars anymore. We'll just have droids and drones, and that's it.
I mean, the people building those things in Boston Robotics are all Chinese kids. It's just the Chinese building it, and they're just gonna take all that research and just take it. Like we have no capacity to make that in the United States. It'd be cool if we did, but we don't. So here's where what does, when we think of cyber warfare, we think if China and Iran and all these have drone, it can level the playing field with drone warfare and droid warfare on the ground. But the U.S. will rely on a lot of cyber warfare, which increasingly it can't do because we're getting hacked by the cartel. That's a story for another stream. Expect that to look it up. Look up cartel hospital hack. A lot of hospitals in the United States got hacked by the cartel, so that's a thing. But what does cyber warfare look like in physical space? It happens in space, like where satellites are, where you can, like with Elon Musk putting up Starlink. So the Space Force is going to have a lot to do with being able to put out the satellites that we're going to need to keep communications online for the Pentagon to be able to communicate with the U.S. troops in Niger and all that. So I don't know if you have droid warfare and increased mobility of Elon Musk helping the Pentagon ship a lot of assets into space. Space battles are coming back. World War III is going to be in space, is what I'm trying to say. Which, if I had to die in a horrible, pointless war on the moon, fighting a Gundam, freaking awesome.
As you can see now, we see it's like freaking Star Wars. We have ships flying around in the space and shit. We're fucking shooting the Death Star out of the goddamn sky. It's just gonna literally be we have tractor beams beaming people off the ground onto the ground. No more parachutes.
It'll be horrible. It'll be horrible. To be sure, it'll be the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, of these young farm boys just dying on the beaches of Normandy, crying and having their heads blown off. But in space, with these huge lasers and having these mech suits ripping each other in half, the same sort of awe-inspiring madness, the same sort of Book of Revelation style destruction that World War I and chemical warfare wrought on the population, but with space lasers. This is some serious shit.
Who needs nuclear bombs when you can just shoot a laser from space?
But you can just go full Dr. Evil. China can do that. They have their electrical battery. Fuck green energy, but China's ability to make batteries is good enough where their electrical batteries, and props to Elon Musk for making an electrical car that's actually good. But there's only so much that that battery capacity has. There's only so much that's done in the United States. The Chinese have made electrical batteries that can fly planes. And that's powerful enough that you could shoot lasers with it. You could put that battery on a satellite and just have a space laser, an Akira style space laser. The U.S. has no hope. If we got into the MJ Anti-Imperialist Party asked a while ago, so is how can they win? How can the U.S. win with so many fronts? It's mentioned about Rome and 1940 Germany overextending. The U.S. can't win. It can't win. The U.S. has not won anywhere where Wagner has deployed its forces, not in Syria, not in, not in Ukraine. It's not going to win against China's capacity to make space lasers. And if we
No,
do,
absolutely not.
And I support China's right to have space lasers. You can't be a sovereign nation without them. I want Niger to have space lasers.
You know what? We're going to see DPRK go on this. I mean, they were one of the few countries that were like, you know what? We're gonna get nuclear weapons, and then now they have nuclear weapons. Their next goal has to be space lasers. DPRK space lasers.
Kim Jong-un needs a big red button to deploy just a hyper beam firing from his moon base.
Well, the funny thing is, in China, I've actually seen some of the laser technology on, TikTok and stuff like this. And it's not just like cutting like metal and precious gems at this point. They have freaking laser cannons that they're shooting from a distance that they're using to cut down like these massive ass trees. Okay.
Oh my God,
now imagine they scale up that model. They could do that.
Cool.
I mean, it's not that far away. We are talking like the Third World War is going to be, crazy stuff that's going to be implemented technologically.
Yeah, Kevin Tui in the comments is right. China does not use child labor. They don't need to. With as much automation as they have, which as much AI technology to coordinate their economic distribution of resources, to learn what the consumer habits of the population so they can sell newer and better goods to people. They have all of their own internal means of construction, building like the Belt and Road Initiative all across Central Asia. It's crazy that people think that China is like some hellhole that needs to enslave the Uyghurs or whatever the new lie is on CNN. It's
gonna collapse. China's going to collapse, just any time now. It's coming. The Chinese collapse is coming, guys.
Any second now. After all, after seeing defeat after defeat in Ukraine and China racking up all these W's, and the deep state in the United States racking up all these L's, it's hard not to think that every time they say these blatant lies, they're like signaling each other they really mean like the US collapse. Do you feel that? Like anytime someone on CNN says the Chinese government is about to collapse any day now, do you get the sense that they're like speaking code about the US government? Because like every time they say like China's gonna collapse, something bad happens in the United States and China just gets more awesome.
I mean, it's a combination of projecting and coping. I really think that is the situation. Every time, whether it's the right wing or the liberals or the left or whatever, crying about, that China's going to collapse, they're really projecting and coping about how U.S. empire is on its way out.
Ron DeSantis doesn't like that the Chinese are banning gays and lesbians from having their own TV shows. So maybe he was talking about maybe China is being too anti-Semitic.
Well, one of the things I wanted to point out here, just real quick, this was a comment.
I saw that. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but
all right, so here's what I'm going to say, right? Because we're on YouTube and there's only so much that can be said about this topic, right? But let's just be very clear. Just because a organization or party supports a certain thing, this is not the primary contradiction. Okay? The primary contradiction, is imperialism. And that's why we support the EFF. We don't support the EFF because they have the right beliefs and the right ideas on, the LGBTQ stuff. Look, I support any anti-imperialist political revolutionary movement in the country, or in the world, rather. I supported the Freedom Convoy up in Canada. I supported the United States with MAGA. I supported the Yellow Vest movement in France. And, I support the FF in South Africa. And, I'm not going to make, this issue. Like the woke people, as well as the anti-woke people, love making these issues the primary contradiction. Just because we recognize that social issues and certain things that we believe in are material realities doesn't mean that's the primary contradiction. So that is not the, the own you think it is.
The culture war is regarded. The culture war is fake. Like if there are gays and lesbians and transgender people in the EFF, they 100% support Julius Malema's right to sing "Kill the Boers," as they should.
Amen.
That would make them based. I might disagree with their sexual preferences, but I will fight to the death for their right to sing "Kill the Boers."
Absolutely.
You're not seeing that in the United States. You see pride parades shilling for Raytheon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like when have we seen any of the, the left actually go out of their way, with a few rare exceptions, right, to support the EFF or support, a lot of these, Latin American countries? They only support Cuba. Let's be clear. They only support Cuba because of the social issues. Regardless of your opinion on Cuba in that regard, we know that's the only real reason why the left support that. And then what is the only other issue that you see the left always rallying behind? Palestine. Well, let's be real. They support Palestine not because they're legitimate. They have a legitimate grievance with Israel. They support Palestine because Palestine has, frankly, so far lost. They support losers because the left loves to lose. And that's really what it gets down to.
I'm glad that you brought this up, because we should talk about something that I wanted to talk about in other streams when we were discussing the red pill. About this, the reason that there's this deeper disconnect with the red pill from mainstream audiences. The more that global war ramps up, the less capable the red pill is to answer those anxieties around those global crises. And we see them align a lot with other degenerate groups, the degenerate Trotskyist left, the pronoun people, the Wignats, the people who should be at each other's throats and often are in the United States context, all come together to support condemning Julius Malema for saying "kill the Boers," because he's too dictatory. He's too
let's just say what it is. He's a man.
He's a man. Yeah, he's a straight man. He's a millionaire based, famous, heterosexual, masculine man advocating for the sovereignty of his people's right to exist, to continue breeding and developing their country. And the culture war despises people's like other people outside of America's abilities to breed. They only want boner socialism.
Yep.
They only want a culture that allows them. The culture war is just defending whatever culture allows you to have the sex that you want, and to hell with everyone else, and not and to attack everyone's rights to just basically procreate. Why is this? Because it comes down to the main contradiction, which is imperialism, whose goal is depopulation when you have all of these groups who are more focused on, the degenerate right, who wants to keep, the white population pure, and they want these either weird Roman pedophilic fantasies to come true, or they want their trad white housewife. And you have the degenerate left that just wants to put on furry suits. Well, I guess Nazis do that too. So again, it all comes to the horseshoe. Like they intersect on so many issues because of this depopulation thing. The right to populate, to have like good, devout, religious, whatever, like Abrahamic sex for the means of procreation. Because the ultimate lever of finance monopoly, of the people who are enslaving you to debt, the ultimate lever they have against you is the population. Because when they can just circulate money and they control all the money, well, then they can outcompete you every time in terms of developing whatever thing they want to develop. What they cannot compete with you with is being able to produce children. There's just a lot more of you than there are of them. And if there are a lot more of you who have to work the machines and the factories and drive the vehicles and grow the crops. And you in South Africa, who, like Julius Malema, is a son of the soil, who can outcompete the neo-colonial ruling class in terms of just breeding enough people to develop their country, people who will be African, go figure, Africans in Africa, they can absolutely outcompete the ruling class, the neo-colonial puppet governments, and their masters in the imperial metropoles. And everyone fighting the culture war despises that fact. They don't want to, so much so they don't want to look at it. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to respond to this rising wave. This rising wave. This African baby boom. This Central American baby boom. Now that Nayib Bukele is sweeping out MS-13, there's going to be even more. Hispanic people, and we're again not going to have them come into the country illegally. We're going to close off the border, but maybe we'll start a federation with them. Maybe the United States will be the largest country in that American federation.
Maybe we need a Pan America, not like the crappy kind that takes away everyone's culture. No, a real Pan America that everyone gets to have their culture, but it gets to reproduce it on a much larger scale because everyone's working together, financially cooperating, rebuilding, the roads, the highways, building, massive, high-speed rail structures. And hey, maybe we should build that, that bridge across Alaska to Siberia. Maybe we should build, massive like hydro water plants on our ocean coastlines that generate electricity, and while also simultaneously getting fresh water that we can pump into the desert regions, and turn Las Vegas into a grassy plain, turn New Mexico and Arizona into a grassy plain, turn Texas into a grassy plain. That's make it that every single section of North and South America is able to be, fertile, able to be industrialized, be able to be entering the 21st century with sovereignty. Because that's what has been lost. We talk about how, in the United States, the Wignats love to talk about how, white people are losing their sovereignty. Well, how do you get your sovereignty back, Wignats? It wouldn't be by trying to, reduce the population. It's
becoming a white slave landlord on your antebellum plantation, just living like they were in the 14th century. In your little house on the prairie with no electricity.
No, they don't they idolize this like deindustrialized past. And don't get me wrong, I love the history of this country. I think that, you know, the cowboy, the white cowboy is the symbol of, you know, the beginning of Western modern or American Western modernity, right? You have the white cowboy, the Mexican railroad worker, and, you know, the black slave struggle. And these are these icons, these symbols of American modernity, right? But that's part of our past. How are we going to reproduce our society going forward? We cannot stay in the past of the cowboy, you know, the Mexican railroad worker, and the black slave struggle. We need to advance past that, have this synthesis between these icons, these cultural identities in America. And the best way to do that is for us to work together as a united force, not just to take down the global imperialists. That's step one. But the next step after that is to create a real hope for our people in the United States, as well as for Canada. Ooh, I think that's something else we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, for this American Federation, it can't happen until there is a special military operation where the United States liberates the helpless people of Canada from the tyrannical forces of Justin Trudeau. And I don't know how many of you have heard of ChatGPT, but I noticed some similarities between, you know, the conflict brewing in Nigeria and Niger, and some regional tensions between the United States and Canada. The two countries might not seem similar, but I just wanted to verify if my schizophrenic pattern noticing had any validity to it. So I asked ChatGPT, what would be similar between a war between the U.S. and Canada that would also that we're currently seeing play out with these tensions between Niger and Nigeria? And it pointed out, let me read this for you. Yeah, in a fictional analysis, this is pure fiction. Fictional. We are not going to invade Canada. We would never dream of invading. In a fictional analysis of a potential war between the United States and Canada, several critical factors come into play. Geographic proximity. Just like Niger and Nigeria, the United States and Canada share a vast and largely open border. Major cities like Seattle, Detroit, Buffalo, and Vancouver are in close proximity to each other, making them vulnerable to being affected by any conflict. Not to mention Toronto. Like all of Canada, 90% of Canada's population is like right there on the border. Just like Niger. Niger's population is like 90% desert, and then a little strip of populated cities right on the and you see chatter on Telegram about the different strategies that the Nigerian military would take to invade Niger. And I would 100% oppose this war were it to happen. If the Senate in Nigeria ever decides to approve their president's calls for invading Niger, I would 100% oppose this because they are puppets of the United States deep state. But if it were to happen, and they were to take some notes about how to possibly do the same thing to Canada, that is one similarity, is is geographic proximity and population density, where the region, and this is to ChatGPT continues, the regions along the U.S.-Canada border are home to millions of people on both sides. Any high-intensity warfare could significantly increase the risk of civilian displacement. Densely populated areas would be in the crossfire. And part of that is coming, like, and when in terms of civilian casualties, for those of you who, you know, think that, oh, the Canadians and the United States would never shoot at each other, we're the best of allies, we're the best of friends. Like, do you know that most terrorists that come into the country, into the United States, come in through the Canadian border? I think 2022 saw like 300 terrorists come in, people with terrorist backgrounds pop up when a background check was done on them when they were caught. 300 of them were caught coming over the Canadian border. Canada is literally a terrorist state.
And let's not forget, Canada is still very, very controlled by the British. They never really had any equivalent to the American independence of 1776 up in Canada. I mean, as it is, we didn't really have complete independence for the British Empire. So you can pretty much guarantee that the people that still put the monarchs on their currency, the British monarchs, on their freaking money, I'm pretty sure, they still have some tension with America. Let's not forget that the British Canada came down in 1812 and burned down our capital at DC.
And you hit the nail on the head with the biggest similarity is Canada has us encircled. You know, the British Commonwealths are encircling the United States. Where the former colony of Britain, Nigeria being a former colony of Britain, Canada, which is a current colony of Britain, is a puppet of the British Crown. And being the major threat to industrial development, justifying a special military operation, because the Commonwealth, I will argue, is the shadow equivalent to NATO, where NATO is controlled by the US, but the Commonwealths of nations run by the British exists to dampen America's power, to subvert America and turn us into a colony once more. If you look up the 64 nations that are part of the Commonwealth of Nations, like a lot of them have America encircled. They're in the Caribbean. Canada's one of them. Belize is one of them in Central America. Just like the United States military is encircling China with military bases, Britain is doing the same to the United States.
And that's why we're going to take down those Angloids. We need to knock them down a peg. We need to break in and break out of these chains that the British Empire has put the United States on. And remember, we not just will liberate ourselves from the British, but we will liberate Canada.
Yeah, if you ever needed a reason to support Niger's independent struggle against ECOWAS and the puppet forces of Nigeria, it's because you understand that the British Empire never went anywhere. And you as an American should be 100% in support of anyone fighting against the shadow British Empire. Fighting this Commonwealth of Nations. Fighting the Canadian and Nigerian puppet regimes. So there you have it, folks. Clip it, wrap it, put a bow on it. The Yankee Tanky has summed it up for you. And I am bringing you to the end of this stream for the Barracks. Once again, reminding everyone watching now, and if you're watching in the future, to like the video, to subscribe, go over to the Barracks on our Twitter channel at the Barracks Live. I'll put it in the YouTube comments here. You can go over to Twitter right now and go to Twitter. Is it twitter.com anymore?
It's just x.com.
Oh no.
Just X.
The rebrand has ruined my outro. But yeah, it should still, it still goes to twitter.com, goes to X. So at Barracks Live. Barracks. And it does. Awesome. Go over, follow us there. We stream live to our Twitter page as well. Twitter streaming is the future. Expect us to be blowing up on Twitter Roseanne Barr just started her own show on X.
Got Tucker Carlson, Roseanne Barr, and then you have the Barracks.
Right. We are the future. We are the people's deep state. So make sure to go over and follow us there. As always, I am a huge fan of the Yankee Tanky, and to have him as my co-host. If you have any last words for us before we head out?
Let me just say one thing and one thing only. The people of Africa will liberate themselves. They will not be held down by the global imperialists, and we shall be inspired by what Africa does here in America, and we shall do the same. Let us stand united against the global imperialists from China, from Russia, from Africa, from Latin America, and once it comes in the United States and Canada, we shall rise! We shall have Victory Day!
07's in the chat, y'all. Gonna end it on a high note. My name is Teray. You're watching The Barracks. That's all we got. We're out.